Hello there today. You are someone and I am someone else. I got this beautiful flag in the background. And today, well, since we're going to be talking about a totalitarian government, I decided to put a little INSOC flag in the back. But today we're going to be talking about what if the Italians, don't know where they're at on the map, over there somewhere. What if the Italians won World War II? Not the Germans, not the Japanese, the Italians. Let's say in a hypothetical scenario, the Italians somehow get super military powers. I don't know how, I don't know when this will happen in the 1940s. Probably, most likely, because that was when World War II happened, right? Let's say they start World War II quicker in our own timeline than they did sooner. Because you gotta realize the Allies, right, in World War II, they didn't want to fight the Germans. So if they weren't willing to fight the Germans, they're definitely not willing to fight the Italians. Although the Italians were way weaker than the Germans, so be honest, they didn't have the industrial might that the Germans did. But hypothetically, now the biggest manufacturers are in Italy, not Germany in this timeline. And so classical fascism instead of neo-fascism becomes the target, not the the race fascism. We're talking about the state fascism, which is what the Italians believed. They were not racist. They were statist. It's pretty obvious based on their literature. They believed in just uniting all the Italian groups into one group and then making it into one state. So there was 35 different tribes, or 35 different groups, of Italians, and they all spoke their own dialects. And so their goal was to unite all the Italian people into one language, one state, one country, whatever, right? I should not be using the term nation and state into one thing, but whatever. It's the same thing, basically. So, fascism is very different from neo-fascism or post-fascism. Post-fascism is what we have today here in the United States. We have a lot of those guys. We have Antifa. We have a bunch of groups. They're like a bunch of militias that just fight in the group, fight in the streets. I'm sorry, they just fight in the streets. They don't really involve themselves with government. Their ultimate game. All these fascists have one thing in common, and it's conform or else, or the level of control. That's really the definition of fascism. In every definition of fascism, however, each fascism has its own definition. Classical fascists are more about state control. Neo-fascists are more about blood and soil, and the post-fascists are more about this. You're a part of a different group, so I'll just fight you on the street. So those are the three different types of fascism, but we're not going to talk about that because, I might get demonetized. So we're not going to talk about that that much. We're just going to talk about the Italians and what if the classical fascist ideology won out compared to all the other fascisms, which fascism died in the early 20th century after the Italians lost, pretty much. Well, even the Japanese, but that was more of an empire sort of thing. That was more of a weird sort of thing. I don't really think they were fascist. They were imperial. That would probably be what I would call them. But anyway, the Italians believed in, originally, the fascist party were, a lot of them were communists. And a lot of people don't realize, why did the fascists start out as communists? Communists are against the state. Well, the fascists realized that, in order to control people, you need to have a state. And so it wasn't really hard to make that switch, really, if you think about it like that. Because the libertarians on the top of the triangle, like I said in my political video about why the libertarians oppose communism and fascism, is because they don't like the idea of control. They agree with the communists on equality, and they agree with the fascists on the existence of a state, although the state should have way less power in the libertarians' point of view, and they believe equality should be also less important than the communists. Right? That's what the libertarians, especially me and some other people, believe, right? So it wasn't hard because of that control line. That's all the fascists really cared about at the end of the day. It wasn't hard to make that switch to communism to fascism. And so they always say that every fascist that's brown on the outside is red on the inside. And that just means that they ultimately like the ideal of state control over other people's ideals, opinions, lives, their labor, which is exactly what the communists want. Confiscate their property, which is also compensation for their labor. They want to take it all from you, even though that they like the ideal of cross ownership or whatever. That would the only person who can technically manage that would be the state. The only group of people who could would be the state. So cross ownership is it's a pipe dream. It doesn't exist. You know what I mean? So that's why hierarchy always has to exist. In the libertarian's point of view, there is hierarchies. But we have multiple competing hierarchies, so no one hierarchy is masterfully like the state, like the fascist one. So that's why the libertarians are always opposed to fascism and communism. That being said, the fascists, again, the one thing that made them agreeable to communists was the control line of the thing, not the equality line, not the humanist line. I mean, not the humanist line and not the state line. It was the control line that made them agreeable. In the triangle of politics, which I've talked about in my other video, again. And if the Italians would have won, it would have made that ideology, that fascist ideology on the right wing, because it's called I call it right-wing socialism. Right-wing socialism, a more palatable ideology. And so we would have believed in this ideal that if we shrunk down the people's property, right? So let's say there's a triangle. Not the triangle of politics, the triangle of power. And we increase the state, so the people are literally controlled to where the state can just issue death penalties no matter what happens. That's what the fascists believe. They believe they had the ultimate right over anybody's life for state. They believe that you were not really a slave, you were just part of the system. There was no such thing as individualism in fascism. Same thing with communists, but they were a little different. And so if the Italians would have won, I think the France would have been the next one to go. I generally do think, because they have the word fraternity in their doctrine, in the French motto, although they still have equality and liberty, but they would squash those out and they would say, oh, the fraternity is liberty and equality. And then it would spread out all of Europe. It would be, Germany would somehow get rid of their neo-fascist beliefs, blood and soil type guys. They would get rid of their race socialism and they would change it to right-wing state socialism. They would somehow, I don't know how, but let's just say ultimately in this timeline that this fascism becomes an ultimate timeline. Now, the Americans, I don't think the Americans would switch over. The Americans have always been opposed to the state from the very beginning. If you look at the Constitution, they've been, we have a rights away from the Constitution. Like, it's like away from the state, what the state governments can't do. So they have federal mandates to make sure states can't violate our rights. So it's a little different. Although you could argue that you're violating the state's destiny by doing that. So maybe fascism would pop up in the United States, but we crushed, I think, ultimately. The Canadians, no, they probably wouldn't be fascist. They still believe in the monarchy. Again, the United Kingdom, you have to change, somehow you would have to change their whole culture in order to do that. You could get, I don't know, honestly, you could probably get the Irish to do it. The Irish, it makes more sense, because the Irish have a different system of, let's say when you're a family, right, in Ireland, they give the son all the money, the oldest son. The younger siblings have to go out and marry or expand their influence in order to get more money. The inheritance is different in Ireland than it is in the United Kingdom. So it'd be easier for Ireland to become a fascist country just because of that. In fact, fascism has always been tried in places where the oldest son gets all the money, inheritance-wise. So it would make sense for Ireland to become fascist. Again, it's very hard and again, they have a hardcore ideology. They believe humans have a struggle. All fascists sort of believe in the ideal of a struggle in a hierarchy, and so they will create a central hierarchy that will take care of everyone. And it's like some sort of utopian vision where the state controls lives, but they also can give you a lot of welfare benefits and stuff like that. And there is some like labor stuff. They pay a lot higher wages for labor and stuff like that. There'll be unions. There'll be different trade unions in this in these governments. They'd be like syndicalists, I guess, would be the word. Fascism is basically synonymous with syndicalism. It's syndicalism is mixed with government, with corporations, which corporations are actually just trade unions. And people don't seem to realize the word trade union and corporate is kind of the same thing, at least in the Italian terms. I mean, today we think of a corporation as a publicly traded stock. And I think the Italians would still like a stock market. I don't think they were suddenly opposed to it. But they would want to control the bourgeoisie under their new state. They would control the bourgeoisie, the masters or the people who are the CEOs. They wouldn't control them under government control, because the government is ultimately representing the people, even though the people don't really have free elections in a fascist society. So, again, this is such a weird timeline because nobody ever thinks about classical fascism anymore. They always think about either the neo-fascists, which believe in a race socialism, or they believe in post-fascism, which is conform or else, but they don't ever think about the state side of it. They just think, oh, my group's more important than the other group when people are fighting out in the streets, which I don't think people are going to be fighting out in the streets for long. I think people are too lazy, and they're not willing to tolerate any longer. And soon they'll go back home because they realize it's not worth it in the end. Again, you should watch my video on why a civil war will not happen. Oh my, you have a whole lot of videos to watch after this, which is crazy to think about. But yes, I came up with all these theories in my head. I read a lot of books on some of this stuff. Again, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. Who knows, right? I could be wrong. Never say I'm right at all. Never say I'm right. Okay, you are someone and I am someone else. Goodbye. You are someone, I am someone else.